We are live. 2023 remote meeting. All council members and staff are participating virtually today. For those of you who are out there with us, welcome. To help everyone follow along, I'll be stating each section of the agenda aloud as we get to it. And we are streaming live on our Virtual Engagement Hub. That's accessible through the Virtual Engagement Hub link on the front page of the city's website. We also have an option for the public to listen live by phone today. To do this, you can call in. Oh, it'll be the same number for both listening live and calling in. For people to call in and comment live during the meeting, we'll use the same number of 855-925-2801. Meeting code is 9791. Your phone will be muted and you will hear the meeting live. At this point, speakers will if you could, say a quick hello when I call your name. Councilwoman Antoinette Mosley.
Good afternoon.
Councilwoman Shanika Smith.
Hello.
City Manager Rachel Wood.
Good afternoon.
Community Economic Development Director Nikki Reed.
Good afternoon.
Did I not hear Sasha? Okay, let's skip on to Community Development Manager Dennis Newburn.
Good afternoon. I think Sage, we're missing.
Okay. I thought you were here with us.
We're missing some of the things you're saying.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay, Community Development Analyst Laura Neer.
Hello.
How about that without video?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, and I'm not sure if we heard Community Development Manager Dennis Newburn. Okay. At 1, if you can hear me, we're going to approve the minutes from the last meeting. We did not meet in July, we met in June. Can I get a motion?
Shanika, you were on mute, so I'll go ahead and so move and then.
I think we may have lost her.
I'm back. I apologize for the connection issues. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we have you.
Okay, so I'm just going to stay off video for ease, and I'm going to move us quickly through the first agenda item of approving the minutes so we can get on to staff and through my connectivity issues. So can I get a motion to approve the June minutes? We did not meet in July. These are June minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, because we're virtual, we'll do a roll call vote. Councilwoman Mosley.
Aye.
Councilwoman Smith.
Aye.
Myself, Sage, aye, and the minutes have passed. All right, so second item on the agenda, folks, today is going to and I think I'm going to pass it to Sasha, who can introduce Kate.
Sure. Thank you so much, Chair Turner. I'm Sasha Bertinsky, as we said before. Thrive Asheville is a local nonprofit, and they are here today to make a presentation. They originally got funding through the American Rescue Plan Act. The City Council awarded funding. They'll talk a little bit about that. And this presentation is just about one piece of their work. So Kate Pett is here, and so is Garrett Razik. And I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Sasha, and thanks to this committee for allowing us to present today. It's thanks to your support and with the help of city staff that we've been able to have the opportunity to explore a critical question in shaping the use of city funds and the development of housing policy. Nearly 2 years ago, hard to believe, I sat down with Councilwoman Mosley to discuss affordable housing, and she raised the question of whether the affordable housing constructed in part with city funds reached the Black and Brown community. She questioned whether Black and Brown community members had sufficient income to access this new housing and raised the possibility that investments could actually be increasing disparities in access to housing. And I'm really grateful to her for raising this point with me and shining a light on what could be an unintended consequence of housing investments that are pegged to income. And this question became a key driver of the project that you are about to hear about. So next slide. This study was a small part of a larger grant for which we're really grateful. With city funding, Thrive has embarked on a project that has 3 housing components. The first is we are mapping and connecting agencies that are working on affordable housing issues in Asheville. The Buncombe Rental Assistance Collaborative is a network of 6 agencies who are working together to increase voucher acceptance by supporting both tenants and housing providers. You can find the website that describes this work and provides a unified platform for these agencies at this link. This study was a part of the investments, and most of the funding actually goes into the third bucket, which is building on the landlord-tenant partnership, which Thrive previously piloted. This year, we added 5 new units to affordable housing stock, which allowed 5 families access to new housing opportunities. We will continue this work through December 2024 and ultimately connect 20 families to housing in new neighborhoods. Today, Garrett Razik, who is Thrive's program director, will be presenting on this research project that we conducted with city staff, and I'm happy to turn it over to him now.
Thanks, Kate. And Katie, we're good for the next slide. So I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Garrett Razik. This is one of the projects I was working on while serving as program director at Thrive. And the vision of this is, as you see right here, it's really better positioning local housing advocates and decision makers to know who is and who is not benefiting from current housing policy by taking a look at 2 really data sets. 1, city housing investments, and 2, housing need in the community, and really understand the gap between those 2. It's a higher level analysis, but I do want to thank all the folks who have participated in making this possible. So particularly city staff and Sasha, as well as members of the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, AHAC, who provided some feedback and I've been working with, and a steering committee that includes Jesse Figueroa of Homeward Bound, Andy Barnett of Habitat, and Greg Borm of Children First. I've also been keeping tabs with the work at Just Economics Housing Group and the Reparations Housing IFA to avoid any duplication and to really leverage any synergies that may exist. Next slide, please. Just want to be very clear about the lens from which this analysis is conducted. The analysis centers those most harmed by inequitable systems, regardless of their share of the population. So they may be a minority of the population in Asheville, but they're majority of the focus of this work, and they are centered. I want to point out that we only can use the data that we have. And so you'll see some groups represented here in these analysis. Doesn't mean to erase other groups. And that is one limitation of data and one thing that we need to be mindful when drawing conclusions. Next slide, please. And so with that, I'm about to show a lot of different types of graphs in a little bit amount of time. And so please know that y'all have this deck. I'm making myself available to follow up with any questions. I've also built a dashboard to make so that you can actually look at the data a little more closely. But really the ultimate question that we are asking here is who is being served by our housing choices and to what extent are they being served? And such a critical component, or critical variable that we use in housing decisions is area median income, AMI. And that's going to be the focus of a lot of this analysis that's been pulled from the U.S. Census Bureau. Next slide, please. And so here's our first data slide. So just to tee it up, we have data from most recent data from the American Community Survey that was published published recently, but this goes back to 2021, that shows median household income by racial or ethnic subgroup. And again, for anyone who's tuning in, median household income, when we see a median figure, so right here in the data set, it shows that Black or African American families in the city of Asheville had a median household income of $29,000. That means that's exactly in the middle of the data set. So 50% of families had higher income and 50% had lower. And so we see here is median household income of $29,000 for Black or African American households, just over $35,000 for Hispanic or Latino households. And that compares to $62,000 for a white non-Hispanic household. And what I've done is added the reference line for area median, the AMI level, what 80% AMI is based on HUD's definition in the same year, 2021. And so we see that 80% AMI was right around $60,000, well above some of the racial and ethnic subgroups that were highlighted. Even if we lower that 80% AMI level for a family of four and said, what about 50% AMI for a family of four? That still would have been over the median income for Black, African American, and Hispanic and Latino households. One limitation of these data is we don't know the exact number of folks in these households, but no matter how we kind of spin it, or say we were looking instead at 80% AMI for a two-person household, that would still be $48,000 and well above what we see here for some of our focal racial and ethnic subgroups. Next slide, please. And this shows how that trends over time. So we're seeing median household income by three subgroups: white, non-Hispanic, that's the blue line; Hispanic Latina households in orange; and Black African American in purple. And we see their median household incomes from 2017 to 2021. And these kind of bullet points right here, these data points that you see, the dots within each year, shows what 80% AMI, HUD's definition, 80% AMI was for a family of four in each of those years, and how it tracks pretty closely with the income growth of white non-Hispanic households. But we see it's further out of reach due to a stagnation in the economic growth of other racial and ethnic subgroups in their households. Next slide, please. And so in a perfect world with the U.S. Census Bureau data, we would have race and gender together. But when the sample gets so small that those data become unavailable. So what I had to do was find like the best data that I could work with on the side of gender. And so what I actually pulled together, again, we're going with median household income across three types of like family compositions, family types. This is the U.S. Census Bureau's language. So we see one group is female householder with children and no spouse present. So for the sake of simplicity, I'll label that subgroup right now like single mother households compared to single father households compared to married couples with children that are 18. And you see here what the 80% AMI level is again for that reference line, HUD's definition. And we see single mother households are well below it, almost 50% of that level that's there, while single father households are almost right at that 8% AMI level. And once again, we're trying to get this distinction of just like cross-cutting like race and gender. And we see here, one thing I should point out, if you're wondering what number of households does it represent locally, under those median incomes, so say we look at single mother households at $33,000 per year, median household income, there's 1,672 of those households in the city of Asheville. So 3 times pretty much the number of single mother households compared to the single father households, and making about 50% of those households when it comes to median income. Next slide, please. And this is how that tracks over time. So over time here we see in blue, single father households, in green, single mother households, and how that median household income has changed from 2017 to 2021 compared to those dots, which is what those mark 80% AMI for a family of 4. And again, we see a growth in income for one group, single father households, and a stagnation when it comes to median household income for single mother households. Next slide, please. So that was all the data that was or some of the data, I should say. Really, I filtered out a bunch of slides, but some of the data from the U.S. Census Bureau. I'm going to turn more towards local city housing data now. But before going to any like land use incentive grant, housing trust fund data, really want to just take stock of a critical component of housing locally. And that's our housing authority communities, our project-based units. And don't want to lose sight of them since they are such a critical component. So next slide, please. So one thing that I've done is back in April of this year, the Housing Authority gave a data presentation to AHAC, the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee here locally, and presented some data on who are voucher holders. And since voucher holders are sometimes seen as a pipeline to other housing decisions that we make in the private market, really want us to reflect on who they are. So I just rolled up some of that data in this way. Right here, we see the racial composition of voucher holders, two types of voucher holders. One, the first one where it says PBV, project-based voucher holders. Those are individuals who are living in housing authority-run communities. And the TBV, tenant-based vouchers, which also sometimes you'll hear tenant mobility vouchers, which really are voucher holders who are moving to the private rental market or in the private rental market currently. And so let me stop for a moment. Say, Councilmember Mosley.
Yeah, I was just wondering if we had any explanation why the numbers seemingly kind of split a little bit between project-based and then when one becomes a tenant-based voucher holder. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely. So yeah, that is, so at the last slide will be like further research. That is the exact question we are asking too. Then more in, because here's what we're wondering. So essentially what we see here, to just to name it up front for anyone who's calling in, is we see a majority of project-based voucher holders are Black or African American, while when we turn towards those with mobility vouchers or in the private rental market, it flips and the majority are actually white. And so then we're asking this question of what is filtering? Is it change a difference in preference? But or maybe more likely so other impediments, whether it's arrears owed or whatever it might be, that is preventing an equal composition that we should see here. And so next slide, please. And so this one, essentially then now we looked at voucher holders by race. This is voucher holders by income, just so we can take stock again of what incomes are we talking about when we're talking about voucher holders. So for project-based voucher holders and tenant-based voucher holders, we're pretty much talking almost the entire population at 50% AMI or below, with heavier concentrations in 0 to 30% AMI for both groups. Next slide, please.
This is Stage. Can I just interrupt for a second?
Yes, please.
Because you've got me thinking about that previous slide. So,
Yep.
And I just want to make sure that there's a lot being said that those listening can follow along. So the mobility-based vouchers are really given the task to find housing that will accept that. It really does fall on the person with the voucher, right? So the project-based voucher goes with the development. So if an apartment complex is built and 30 units are dedicated to project-based vouchers, then those 30 units will always accept folks that have vouchers in hand. Whereas the mobility aspect means you now are given this opportunity to pay just any old landlord with your voucher, but you got to go find that unit, right? Just to be clear.
Yes.
Because often we hear like if the folks can't find a unit, then the money goes unused. So I think that's kind of I hope when you guys are doing more study that's one of the things that's looked at. I mean, the onus, and this is why the LTP with Thrive with y'all is so successful, right? Because you really help bridge that gap of helping find units to folks that are out there looking.
And that kind of like navigation is crucial in the community. Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
Absolutely. All right, Kay, I think we're good for next slide. And now we're going to turn towards some, these data, Sasha and other city staff members were instrumental in providing. Again, I took only a subset of the data. I have more slides. If y'all want to dive deeper, please let me know. But now we're going to take a look at some city housing investment data. Next slide, please. So we have here, this graphic shows all those units that were approved in the last 10 years. And when I say units, I mean those deemed to be affordable housing units, as defined as serving those at the 80% AMI level or below. And another thing to point out, you see like the years there from fiscal year 13-14 to 22-23, that these are those units that were approved. So we're not talking about built right now. And so on the first bar graph on the left, we know that there's a composition when a project comes up for a vote. There's a composition of project that might be mixed income, that might be deemed affordable. Say 20% of the units are affordable. And so essentially what this bar graph on the left side gets is we see that there in the past 10 years, there are just shy of about 1,500 affordable units at 8% AMI and below approved. And now those projects also had mixed income, those that were market rate units. And so just to understand, like over time, what is that like kind of percentage average out to? So about 28% of the projects that were approved were affordable units. And so if we just look at that subset of those, like just shy of 1,500 affordable units, what was the projected funding? Because again, they weren't all built, but what was it projected to be for those 1,500? And that's the bar graph on the right. We see that right around 50% of the funding source for these 1,500 units was LUIG, which is in that dark green, housing trust and housing trust fund, which is in the light green there. And then the other 50% leveraged some other funding, would be federal funding, other city funding, bond money, but they had found another funding source. Next slide, please. And so this is the same data set, but instead here, this is where if y'all want to see like a dashboard where you can hover over every one of these circles and find the exact, like what the project was. This is the same data. So all those projects that have affordable units in them that were approved by council in the last 10 years, each one of these circles is a unique project over that time period. And what we have here is it's on the y-axis, we have what percent of that project was affordable at 8% AMI or below. And on the x-axis there was the total number of units that were built in that project to get at scale of the project and also the impact when it comes to addressing affordability concerns. We see they're colored by whether they were a housing trust fund or a LUIG project or leverage both funding. And one quick takeaway here is that housing trust fund projects, that may be no surprise to folks in the room here, the housing trust fund projects were more likely to be 100% affordable, while LUIG was tended to be at 20% of those units in that project were affordable or below 20%. And really the only one that we see in between there, here is 40%, was a project that leveraged both housing trust fund and LUIG. Next slide, please.
Quick question for you. I apologize if you're about to say this, but
please.
So are we assuming that is because the NCHFA projects or tax credit projects can request an HTF, but they often don't request a LUIG because it doesn't align, the value doesn't pencil? Is that what we're thinking some of that is? Is that why? That might be more of a staff question.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I'm gonna turn to Sasha and ask Sasha that question.
I think yes, that is the explanation. We just saw that one this past January, I think, or a few months ago that did ask for a LUIG. That's a tax credit project, but yes. I think we also have a local developer. We also have a local developer who's done 100% affordable projects, but doesn't like to do anything with federal funding. So we have some people who just want to use local funding and not get into all the paperwork of doing something federal as well.
Thank you.
All right. Next slide, please, Katie. And so say we take just a deep dive into to LUIG, the land use incentive grant as a city funding tool. What we have here, just to tee up the graph again, on the y-axis, we have the number of affordable units from that project. And on the x-axis, we have what was the subsidy per unit, a metric that we sometimes see that takes the number of affordable units and then divides the subsidy to get the subsidy per unit. And then so what we see here also these data points represent a unique project. So any of the projects that have received LUIG funding or planned to have received LUIG funding, and they're kind of color coded by who they ideally serve. It's not perfect because projects sometimes a project might serve AMIs between 30 and 80%. Others might be clean cut and just serve like, okay, the goal here is 60%. And so that's why they're color coded differently. But really what we see here is Luigi funded projects that serve those really roughly from 30% to 60% AMI appear to acquire lower subsidies per affordable unit. When I say lower subsidies, I really mean lower Luigi subsidies. They are undoubtedly leveraging other types of subsidies outside of Luigi. We also see that a greater proportion of overall Luigi funding has gone towards producing units at 80% the 8% AMI level. And to put an exact figure on that, I have it here as at least 60% of Luigi units will likely go, because not all of them have moved through the process or have gone to those at 80% AMI. Next slide, please. And this is rounding out our data slides. We've been talking a lot about council approval and all the different stages of the development process. So I asked Sasha to just give me all those affordable housing units that were permitted in the past 5 years. Let's get a little more recent in our time frame. So all those that received a permit from 2018 to 2022, how did they break down by group served? And so that's what you see here, the bar graphs here of those that on their face value, who they were going to serve. Later on, you'll see a recommendation that we have is on like really getting clear on like who ended up being served, because who was planned to be served sometimes is different than that. So what we see here is that the majority of affordable units were at the 60% AMI level, often coming from the Housing Trust Fund on that side. But really, I want us to just like remember those median household income data, and that even the 60% AMI is far above what we're seeing from households in different racial and ethnic subgroups in our community. Next slide, please. And so with that, some quick conclusions or recommendations for potential future work. Next slide, Katie. Thank you. One, this is not a surprise that the data clearly show that persistent racial and gender income gaps impact which community members are able to access affordable housing. And therefore, those housing investments that target incomes at higher ends of affordability, so the 60 to 80% AMI level, can potentially exacerbate racial and gender gaps in our community. I don't want to leave folks with the impression that 60 to 80% AMI housing is not needed, but it certainly could by focusing on that, it could exacerbate those racial and gender gaps. And then three, that to speak to that, programs, policies, and subsidies that focus on 30 to 50% AMI levels are really needed based on these data to serve more Black, Latina, and female community members. And that's both in the private rental market investments, but also in project-based housing when we think of the share of the population that resides in it. Next slide, please. And because if not, what we're going to see is this continued, what I've just labeled like this racial-based filtering that happens in the community, where what we have is we may have a large subset of Black and Brown project-based voucher holders. And then Councilmember Mosley, you pointed out that there's almost this like filtering, right? That we saw too, that goes from the stage of the project-based voucher holder to the tenant mobility voucher holder. So there's further filtering there. And then there's filtering from that stage to the next one of those who are able to find housing because maybe there isn't an adequate supply of that housing stock. And then there's another layer of filtering that there's sometimes additional property owner criteria related to credit scores, past records of eviction, or other legal issues, even sometimes payment methods, how they are paying their landlord could be an issue. And so there's all this filtering that occurs in our community, and there's different types of interventions that can deployed at different portions of this to prevent that filtering from happening. Next slide, please. And so what we recommend is some other interesting areas to explore. Some of these are in the process of being explored by the city currently, but just one, what we named already, why do those voucher disparities exist between project-based voucher holders and tenant mobility voucher holders? Two, this is something that's underway, but we really want to see increased investment and really understand, moving from just like who we think is going to access the housing to who's actually getting in that housing, and really increasing that monitoring that's going on, whether it be city-run monitoring or assistance from another party to understand who is living in that subsidized housing, and so we can further address disparities. And then three, when we think of valuation of projects, and I've heard this conversation in the past, so nothing new here, but expanding the kind of the scope of how we value a project beyond just subsidy per unit and factor in things when we compare projects like maybe like subsidy per person housed, if we think of families, or subsidy per person housed per year when we want to factor in things like the length of affordability as well, rather than just taking the one clear cut number of subsidy per unit. So that's all we got. I want to see if there's any lingering questions, but I'll making myself available if there's any follow-up from anyone. Thanks, y'all. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I mean, this is, I need to think it's incredible information. There's a lot to digest there too. Councilwoman, any particular questions? I can't see your hand up, so just go ahead and speak up.
Hey, no questions, but just great gratitude. I mean, the analysis is much helpful and much needed right now to kind of shape our future investments and the conversations around where we spend our dollar and who's able to benefit. So, yeah, a lot of gratitude.
That's great. And I think Kate has her hand up. Go ahead, Kate.
I just wanted to add, and first of all, thanks again for the city for investing in this project. We really appreciate it. And thanks to the city staff for all of your help in making it possible. I think one of the takeaways for me is that I know that there's a lot of pressure coming at council to really focus on the number of units constructed. But when we focus purely on the number of units constructed without really this deeper analysis of who is being served, we could in fact have that unintended consequence that I think I mentioned at the top of this presentation, which is that we could actually increase disparities. So thanks for this opportunity and kudos to Garrett and everyone for the good work.
And just to add on to that, Kate, one thing I want to name for everyone in the room as well is that I'm actively talking to Sasha about how this can feed into the affordable housing plan update, so that these are not separate things, and that I've even offered to like meet with the consultant, talk about what data do we have, what questions are we asking, so this really is aligned and feeds into that process.
And Sasha, remind me, was there a survey, things are running in my mind, where we asked folks in the community their preference, and the response was they would almost rather see, they were more concerned with more deeply affordable units than other types of units, or if they weren't going to be deeply affordable, they didn't care how much if you had a greater supply.
Right. I think what you're talking about, AHAC, they have been working outside of their regular meetings, and they did put a survey out to agencies who work with folks. And really what they're trying to do is dig down into the LUIGE scoring and the Housing Trust Fund scoring. So there was a question, I think, like what should the priority be? It wasn't a wide ranging survey of the entire community. It was mainly agencies. I didn't want them to get too far ahead of our consultants before they get a chance to start. So I don't know if that's what you're talking about or not. But.
I believe that is what I'm talking about, because in my mind, a takeaway from this, and then jump in, Kate, and tell me if I'm wrong, is we're better able to target folks at lower AMI through the Housing Trust Fund versus LUIGE. Is that the takeaway thus far?
I think LUIGE was created, it all comes down to like, what's the purpose of the program and how much is it subsidized, right? So LUIGE could target lower income folks, but the subsidies are going to have to be higher. So these are usually market rate developers. They're running their, pro forma analysis, and they're looking at what the gap is. So if we lower the amount of rent coming in for a lower income household, then the gap becomes bigger, and then it just needs more subsidy. So that's what they would be asking for.
And then it often makes me wonder, I was having a conversation with someone about this morning, and maybe next time, Kate, y'all can look into this. I wonder if there are times when we say we want to get to X AMI, and then folks give us the 20% at whatever that AMI is. When folks are in the business of making money, could that potentially take what would have been a market rate, this wouldn't be the number, what would have been a market rate of $1,000, does that weirdly incentivize folks to instead have that market rate be $1,100?
Yes.
dollars,
Yes.
and then we have unintentionally actually increased the fair market value.
Yes, people have talked about that before, that you would actually end up raising your other rents to subsidize the lower. And that's why the way to counteract that would be with more subsidy.
Right.
So it's how are you filling the gap? Are you filling it internally with higher rents, or are you getting a bigger subsidy?
Or do we need to subsidize nonprofits more? Just a thought.
Right. So to Garrett said it very well. Like, so this part of the plan will be looking at this exact issue. Because Luigi had a very specific purpose, was to put affordable housing as far and wide as we could in every project. But it's a lot of money and it's a lot of council, city resources. And so now the question is that how we want to be focusing those resources?
Because my broader thought is, okay, if we do a Luigi for $2 million for 10 units, would we be better off using that $2 million in taxes coming in to increase the housing trust fund yearly allotment from $500,000 to $1 million or something? That's just what's going on in my mind. It is not a statement of what we want to do or what I propose we do. It's just how I'm thinking of it right now.
Well, and Councilman Mosley, this is Sage. It makes me wonder. So that's why I mentioned those blue circles on that graph, because those are the NCHFA tax credit projects that we're pairing the HTF with, which I believe, if I'm following along with the county's progress on affordable housing in recent years, this is something they've just deduced as their target as well. To really partner with NCHFA projects and help loan money if needed or contribute money. So it sounds like we may all be kind of funneling towards similar direction.
Or I'm wondering if
I have
different
go ahead.
subsidy allowances for nonprofit versus for-profit. Just instinctually, I realize that the lower the AMI, the more the subsidy would need be. And then sometimes I feel we get caught up in, oh, well, this is being developed, at a greater per unit subsidy, but by definition, that's what's necessary to get to the lower AMIs. But okay.
I had a couple questions, but I want to make sure I'm not interrupting. Are you done
Go
with your okay? One thing I thought of throughout this presentation, especially at the end when we were talking about mobility vouchers, is I learned a couple years ago that the process for getting to the mobile voucher or housing choice was at first spending a year in a project-based voucher residency. And I had reached out to who is now the previous director, David Nash, for HACA, and just said, where did this rule come from? You have to be in a project-based voucher for 12 months before you can get the mobile one. And it was an internal rule. It's something that can be changed. So I don't know if as we navigate this, we might want to consider that, if we're going to be subsidizing things and stuff, we may not need to require that rule and blend this need for project-based and mobile-based if we can just get to mobile, if we see that as a better solution or a more needed solution.
Could I make a comment on that?
Sure.
Just real quick. This is Kate. I think I would discourage that myself. Right now, we know that project-based voucher holders are disproportionately Black and brown folks. And so this is one way in which we actually are able to advantage that group by ensuring that we make tenant mobility vouchers first available to people who hold PVVs. If we open it up to the community in general, then I think we're going to lose the potential equitable opportunity we have here to really provide that benefit directly to this community that we know has been least benefited by other opportunities.
Right. So what you're getting back to that slide that showed 53% and 44%. Okay. So knowing what you've learned, it doesn't make sense at this time. But thank you for speaking up about that, Kate. Just kind of thinking out loud. And then I want to make sure I understand something, because if we go back to the very beginning of this presentation, let me get back to it, like page 3 or 4, slide 3 or 4, where we talk about median household income by race, ethnicity, city of Asheville, and it shows the the chart in the 80 AMI level. Did I understand correctly? So we're not able to identify data further for those 2 bullet points of what size that household is. But we saw that even if you were comparing it to a family of 2, that it was still in the 50,000 range. Can someone repeat that? What was said with that slide?
Absolutely. So essentially, from the U.S. Census Bureau data, I mean, the gold center of the data would just be like actually have all of it, have racial ethnic subgroup, what percent of that population falls at this AMI level versus that, like have all that, and then also even bring in household size as well into that equation. But since we don't, we have to just have these like proxy data. So it's exactly what you said, Councilmember Turner, in that we just can compare it to different AMIs compositions, whether it be household size or actually percent of that AMI, and even however we change it. Particularly Black, African American, and Hispanic Latino households fall well below it. We talked at one point, Councilmember Turner, that one way in which we can get those data is the housing authority do have data on household size, and they have race ethnicity based data. So if we want to use those data to project out, we could do it. And so that's one vehicle to use local.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, so with additional information, we might be able to dig deeper. Okay. Well, that's a good segue to my last question. Is Thrive interested in like keeping up with this data? I mean, and maybe being the research body that is tasked with going back to figure out who was actually rented to? I mean, this is priceless information, I think, especially while we're opening up policy and trying to figure out the true impact of our subsidies and intentions, right? I mean, is that something Thrive might consider in the future? If we, sometimes like with the Bowen report, we do like a biannual update, but I wouldn't want to lose the track of this kind of information.
I think we'd love to, Thrive would love to certainly be really involved in the creation of the affordable housing plan, as Sasha and Garrett have already been working together. And I think we want to support that and definitely stay in touch with asking these kinds of questions. This is the kind of work I think that we really need to be having more information. And I think as a nonprofit partner with the city, we're well positioned to continue to do this work and excited to do it. So I think the answer in general to your question is yes.
That's great and a relief. I really appreciate the effort and outcomes of this information already. I mean, it's just very helpful. So thank you to everybody involved and Garrett for your GIS abilities there that made it also very informative. I mean, if you're able, I don't know if everybody will be able to hover over and see all the projects and stuff. That's a public facing document, but if so, it's great. All right, any other questions for this item on the agenda, Councilwoman or staff? Any other comments? Okay, we are going to close up item 2 on the agenda for those of you listening at home. Thanks to everybody that was able to call in and assist with that. Moving on to item 3, which is the reallocation of CDBG funds. And Dennis is going to lead us off. And I'm not sure if Dennis has been properly introduced. If not, Nikki, do you want to maybe give him a welcome?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. So we welcome Dennis as our new Community Development Division Manager in May. So he is still in the early part of his career with the city of Asheville, but we are so happy to have Dennis. He comes to us from the city of Clarksville, Tennessee, where he worked in community development, economic development there for Clarksville. And he has a long career in administering HUD programs in different municipalities and counties, townships across the nation. So we're thrilled to have Dennis. And I guess this is his debut appearance here at the HCD. But I do think he's also going to bring Laura Neer into the presentation. So Dennis, I'll turn it over to you.
I almost feel compelled to do it now after you said all that. Thank you, Nikki. But Laura Neer is actually going to do the presentation today, and I'll be around for questions that come up. So, Laura.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. So the project at hand today is for the reallocation of CDBG funds to a project at 108 Patton Avenue that's aiming to expand accessibility on that street. Next slide, please. The key takeaways: the city of Asheville has available CDBG funds that need to be spent in order to meet HUD's timeliness requirements. The Community Development Division identified unallocated CDBG funds and recommended funding public facilities, public improvement projects, and projects that improve accessibility in order to achieve compliance with CDBG program timeliness requirements. After the submission of proposed accessibility projects from multiple city departments, the Community Development Division determined that the accessibility project located at 108 Patton Avenue was the best fit for the reallocation of $300,000 in CDBG funds. Proposed activities are expected to be completed by April of 2024 and will be funded from recaptured prior year's unobligated CDBG funds. This action is going to require an amendment to the HUD Annual Action Plan in order to proceed with the project. Next slide. So a little bit about this project at 108 Patton Avenue. It is an expanding accessibility project. The community development staff met with multiple city departments to discuss projects and their capital plans that would meet HUD CDBG requirements and address accessibility concerns. After reviewing all proposed projects for CDBG eligibility, benefit, and overall cost, staff is recommending that the accessibility project located at 108 Patton Avenue between Cox and Ashland should be considered for funding at the estimated price of $300,000. The proposed improvements are to replace the curb ramps and the sidewalk on both sides of Patton Avenue. This project is also located in an area that has access to multiple essential services, including the federal building, Health and Human Services, the U.S. Post Office, banks, and is less than a block away from the art station. The proposed activity is consistent with the goals and objectives of the CDBG program. And additionally, this project was identified as a top priority in the city's GAP plan. Next slide, please. Here's some pictures of the site. You can clearly see that it's in pretty bad shape right now. There's not any curb ramps that are accessible. So what we want to do is to go replace these sidewalks on both sides and then add some curb ramps as well. Yes.
I want to make sure I have the location right. Is that like right in front of that bank on one side and across from WRES on the other?
Yeah, let me show you in the next slide because there's a map I can show you. So it's right here. The bank is, I can't even point it out. So Asheville Avenue, yeah, it's right in front of that bank on both sides of the street. There is a more detailed map in the staff report. I just did not have time between submitting this and getting that map to put it in this presentation, but it shows you where the curb ramp replacements are going to be, and then it gives you a detailed look at exactly where the sidewalks are going to be replaced. And it's going to be all back where I highlighted it in yellow on both sides of that road.
And has there been any community engagement regarding this process yet at all? And there's a reason I'm asking, but I can understand why there wouldn't have been. But
we just identified it a few weeks ago. I know Dennis probably knows a little more about the community engagement with this.
So I'll go ahead and say something. It's of course not a direction, but I'd spoken to some folks at one of the locations and they're still kind of up in arms about the proposed bike lanes right there. So I think it would behoove us to speak with them directly. I think they would likely be supportive of this, but I'd encourage us to speak with them directly and taking this position of this, not that this is what is going to happen, but to elicit their ideas about what is going to happen. I think it'll save us a lot on the back end if we do it that way. In particular, I'm talking about WRES.
Yeah, interesting mention there. I was thinking similarly just about how doing things to Patton Avenue without reaching out to those businesses might mean a misstep. I have more of a background, like how we got to this project question. Councilwoman Mosley, were you complete with your
I am.
thought? Okay. I'm just kind of curious. So maybe staff can help me, and I don't mean to confuse anyone listening in, but this is previous unallocated or allocated but deemed unused funds, CDBG funds from several years back. And I think, as I recall, it's from the non-public services amount. Can anyone confirm this? Because what comes to mind is like these CDBG funds have done a myriad of things from helping economic development, small business development, habitat for humanity, home repairs and stuff. So I'm kind of trying to draw the line from how we got to those more typical uses to what almost seems like sidewalk repair. And I don't want to downplay the importance of accessibility or, this area, but I'm just can someone tell me how we got to this choice?
Sure, and thank you for the question. I kind of thought it would come up at some point in time, and it's a very important question. With respect to the Community Development Block Grant Program, and as Nikki introduced me as new, one of the very first things that I had a responsibility to do was to kind of go back through past year's funds that were determined to be unobligated and to figure out a use for those funds. That was further amplified by the fact that we received notification from HUD a couple of months ago that we had some money in the treasury line item that's treasury accounts that we needed to spend. And so in coming up with this project, and for those of you that are familiar with the Community Development Block Grant Program, from a holistic perspective, we're involved in activities that involve obviously things inside the home, healthcare, nutrition, employment, but also things that affect the community from a visual standpoint. So infrastructure, parks, curbs, and sidewalks, those type of things too, in addition to the public services activities that you spoke of. With respect to accessibility is one of those things that will affect someone in our lives at some point. And to be proactive, we were challenged to come up with ideas of ways that we could effectively reduce the amount of architectural barriers within the community. This particular project on Patton Street kind of goes into play with the other activities that are going there. And Councilwoman, I heard your concern a few moments ago. I know the city will take great efforts to make certain that all the residents or businesses are notified and asked for their input as part of the project. But yes, with regards to the use of funds, they do represent past funds, prior year's funds that are unobligated, and we'll continue to evaluate those funds and perhaps come back with similar projects, but not necessarily of the public services, primarily because public services activities are capped administratively or legally rather at 15% of the grant allocation. So we're looking at physical improvement projects. This one is a very good fit and one of several that I hope that we undertake that addresses accessibility throughout the community.
You know, so thank you for that background. One of the things that I'm reminded of, fellow councilwoman, I don't know if I was kind of surprised to see this on the agenda, but alongside this, we have a request coming from Compass Point Village for more money because they can't complete. I hear Councilman Roney talking about bus shelters, and I'm just wondering, so I guess whatever happens at this committee level will go to council, but I'm just expressing that I wonder if a more broad look at what this $300,000 could do is of interest to anyone else.
For the record, we actually did speak with Compass Point. We're very familiar with that project. And one of the challenges in using federal dollars, in particular Community Development Block Grant funds, is the fact that there are a whole host of regulations and rules that come along with the use of that money. It was my opinion at the point in time that we were asked about the possibility of using CDBG funds, that it would have in fact tainted the entire project. And what I mean by that is that all of the regulations in regards to the environment, in regards to labor relations, would have come into play and would have had a very negative financially impact on that project. We have discussed, and we hope to continue discussing going forward as they complete this first project, going forward with the second phase, and figure out a way that we can be involved in the project in a manner that's economical for both the organization as well as for the community, and to help them further their objectives of providing the housing for homelessness. So it wasn't an oversight, and we actually did talk to a few organizations about the possibilities of other activities that could be undertaken, but with respect to the actual costs associated with it, from an economical standpoint, it actually turned out to be a lot easier to undertake this particular activity with our own city forces, therefore not triggering a lot of the laws and regulations that are associated with the receipt of federal funds, and by ultimately undertaking an activity that would have a tremendous amount of good for the community.
Thank you for the additional contact, Dennis. Ahead of the council meeting, I'm wondering if those council members that are not on HCD and not familiar with all of the things we do other than reviewing the annual action plan when we bring it to them may have more questions about this, and it may warrant a little more defining and what public service versus non-public service I know I'm going to bring it up, so just a little heads up. I'm a little more curious of what could be done with these funds. I guess the one last follow-up question, Dennis, does anybody know if this project and this sidewalk repair was slated under another schedule of capital projects or already funded, or is this just something that was out there as a big desire that had no funding available?
So it was one of several that had been identified previously. And frankly, that's the best place for us to look in terms of city projects. I think that with respect to this particular one, given the fact of where Laura said it was located, given the fact that the benefit would be tremendous upon completing the activity, from our standpoint, along with the fact that it's something that could be done within a relatively short period of time, it made perfect sense to go forward with this one.
Okay, thank you, Dennis.
This is Nikki. I do want to chime in and underscore the need to spend these funds in a timely manner. I think that was one of the most prominent reasons why we looked internally for the allocation of these funds to a sidewalk project, is really just to try to meet the deadline with the expenditure of funds. That seemed to be a big driver in the decision making here, and I want to make sure that that's clear.
When is that deadline?
April of 2024. I wanted to reiterate that as well, Nikki, is that one of the hindrances of finding projects was the timeliness, because between coming to HCD, council, public notices, most of the other projects that we looked at would not be completed by the deadline.
All right, thank you, everybody. Any other thoughts or questions from council members? Okay, they are looking for a recommendation and taking an action. Would anyone like to make a motion?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I recommend that City Council reallocate a total of $300,000 of previous year's community development block grant funds to the accessibility expansion project located at 108 Patton Avenue as an amendment to the HUD annual action plan, and authorize the city manager to sign all necessary documents to this effect.
Second.
Okay, and because we're virtual, I'll do a roll call vote. Councilwoman Mosley?
Aye.
Councilwoman Smith?
Aye.
And myself, nay. And the item will still move forward to council for recommendation. Thank you. For those of you listening at home, we have completed item number 3. We're going to move on to item number 4, which is revised affordability terms for Haywood Street Housing Trust Fund loan. And I think, Sasha, you're going to lead us through that one, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair Turner. So this item is, I'm Sasha Martinsky again, and Reverend Brian Combs is also here today. Haywood Street Community Development has a project at West Haywood Street that the city has invested a lot of funds in, and they are asking to revise their housing trust fund terms, not loan terms, but affordability terms. Next. So just a few key takeaways. In February of 2022, City Council authorized a land purchase agreement and a housing trust fund loan with Haywood Street Community Development for 45 rental homes. And since then, they have incorporated additional land into the development site and redesigned their building in order to address rising construction costs. The redesign of the development has resulted in changes to the affordability mix that require council approval. Revisions include a reduction of the number of units from 45 to 41 and changes to the AMI thresholds and bedroom mix. And I will also say the changes to the project will be coming to City Council tomorrow night as a revision to their conditional zoning. Next. So just some background on the project funding. These are a list of the different pieces of funding from the City of Asheville and other organizations. So the City of Asheville gave a grant for the purchase of land in $1.3 million. We also have a grant for pre-development costs of $296,000 and the Housing Trust Fund loan at $904,000. Buncombe County, and that I'm realizing that should also say grant, I believe, for construction, $749,000. And Dogwood Health Trust also gave a grant for $2 million. Next. So as I said before, they redesigned the project and assembled a third parcel into the development. This is on the edge of the Weekend neighborhood, if you remember, and 240 is below. So there is a lot of topography on the site. So construction costs can be high when you're dealing with a topographical site like that. So they've redesigned the building. And the loan terms will remain the same. And the loan terms is no interest and deferred payments for the first 10 years, interest only at 1% for the next 10 years. And then at year 20, the loan will either convert to an amortizing loan on a 30-year amortization at 1% interest, or the Housing Trust Fund principal will be repaid in full as a part of a refinance of the total debt stack at that time. Next. So here's a table just comparing the original proposal and the current proposal. There's a slight decrease in the number of units. The income restrictions in the original proposal and in the ordinance, and that's really why we're here today, is because this was all written into the resolution rather for the Housing Trust Fund loan. So it's very detailed. So deviations, besides like maybe a very minor deviation, really requires council approval. So they're asking that all units be reserved for 80% and below, and that units for voucher holders were at 56%, 23 units, and whereas now they are proposing 50%, and that will be in the deed restriction. They do intend to lease 90% of the units to voucher holders. So that's a pretty high number to commit to on a permanent basis, because this is a permanent affordable project. So they would like 50% in the deed restriction, but really they are going to begin by leasing for 90%. And I think they will do that as long as it's economically feasible for their project. And Reverend Combs can address that more if you like. And then the bedroom mix has changed a little slightly. We have an additional 3-bedroom unit and then pretty much close to the same thing with that reduction of overall units. Next. So staff is recommending approval based on the following. The revised structure gives them some flexibility so that families that come in with vouchers, as they increase their income and get better jobs, they are not forced out at some point, and that they can grow economically in the project. 50% of the units will be reserved for voucher holders, and they intend to, as I said before, intend to lease 90% of them to voucher holders for those who have incomes below 50%. And based on their benchmark of $80,000 subsidy per unit, the subsidy in this scenario is close to $61,000 per unit, and that's very reasonable given that this is permanently affordable. And it's deed restricted to that permanent affordability, ensuring a long-term supply of rental units at this location. Next. And so then we have our recommended motion, and that, I guess the last slide is key takeaways again, but that concludes my presentation. Would be happy to take questions, and Reverend Combs is here as well.
Thank you, Sasha. Councilwoman, any questions for Sasha or Reverend Combs? Okay, I was able to review this ahead as well, and I don't have any questions. So I suppose if there are no questions or comments, we could entertain a motion.
I'm happy to do this one as well. I move to recommend that the Asheville City Council approve the revised affordability levels and unit count for the Housing Trust Fund loan for the Haywood Street Community Development Project at 339, 343, and 357 West Haywood Street.
I second. All right, and because we're virtual, we'll do a roll call vote. Councilwoman Mosley?
Aye.
Councilwoman Smith?
Aye.
And myself, Sage? Aye. Thank you very much. So that item will move on to City Council, I believe, tomorrow night with our recommendations. Okay, so looking back at today's agenda, that is the closure of item number 4, and we're moving into public comment. Katie, do we have anybody online wishing to make a public comment?
One moment, let me check. No, we do not.
Okay, thank you. So I guess we've answered a lot of questions. Thank you to everybody for today's effort. I'm just really thrilled to see some of the data that came from today, as well as projects that will continue to move forward. And I guess with that said, we are adjourned, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.